So I'm delighted to welcome you all to our featured composer interview for this year's Chamber Music on Valentia Festival. I'm absolutely delighted to present Deirdre McKay, and we're being recorded by Nathan James Dearden, who is our festival manager. So you can't see him, but he is actively here recording this interview behind the scenes. Deirdre was supposed to be on Valentia with us. We're recording this from our respective homes, which obviously aren't on Valentia. And if we were there in person, the audience would have had an opportunity to hear an interview like this, also hear Deirdre talk about her pieces in the context of the performances that they were going to be in, and also a really valuable opportunity to have a Q&A where people can actually ask their burning questions about what is it like to be a composer, or what inspired you to write that piece, and these kinds of questions, as we really work to break down perceived barriers that composers and musicians are also people, and that they can converse with you as much as write music for you and play music for you. And that's a really wonderful aspect, I think, to our festival, which our audience very much participates in and feels a sense of ownership over. So when we were programming this online version of the festival for this year with specially created content, it was really important to us to be able to speak to Deirdre and hear her speak to you, actually. So I've got about 5 questions, which I'm sure is absolutely ample for about a half an hour of an interview, which I'm sure will be revealing about the person and the music. And we will also talk about Kerry. So Deirdre, would you like to introduce yourself? And my first question really would be, if I was an audience member, I would be really curious to know how you actually started as a composer. Why did you start?
Yeah, it's a really, it's a question that never kind of goes too far from me, really, why are you doing this? But I mean, for me, I suppose the beginning really was when we were in primary school, because I was, my mom is from the west of Ireland, my dad's from the north of Ireland. I was reared in the north of Ireland, where we have the kind of peripatetic music system. So there was a violin teacher was coming into the primary school, but there was only 3 places per year group. So we were ear tested, basically. So the 60 odd kids, I suppose, for the year group were ear tested, and you were selected then for violin. And to be honest, I mean, I do have a really strong memory of the violin teacher coming in. She played in the assembly hall, and I kind of melted because I thought it was the most insanely gorgeous, magical thing I'd ever heard. And I totally fell in love with what she was playing. I couldn't understand how she could make that noise out of this tiny little thing, and I desperately wanted to be picked, but I had no idea if I was musical. I didn't know. And so then I was beside myself with excitement that I was selected, and it became this huge thing. And I've taught violin. Nobody sounds good when they start the violin, but I became I just loved it. And I think about 6 months in, maybe, I suppose it was my first kind of foray into composing, but I had no consciousness that that's what I was doing. But it was actually just a really simple thing, that there was a couple of really hot numbers in the violin book, like Twinkle Twinkle, Bobby Shafto, and in between there was a lot of kind of unexciting weekly homeworks. And it actually was really why I just thought, well, I know at least 5 notes, and maybe if I kind of jumble them in a different order and, do something different, maybe it would just magically become another lovely little number, a bit like Twinkle Twinkle. And that's actually why I first, I suppose, was my first compositional effort, but I had no concept of it. And I remember also at the same time being quite frightened I might get in trouble, that maybe I had been a bit bold, or I shouldn't have done that, or maybe that was a bit cheeky, or so it was a kind of, but I quite like looking back, that having no awareness of that it seemed like a natural instinct to sort of, you know, can I make something else? Could it be something a bit like this? Because, you know, some of the numbers are not very exciting that you end up playing. And I thought, well, you know, could there be something else? And actually, do you know, I don't know that it's that different, like the whole way through, that every time you make a piece, in a way, it's the same kind of, you know, curiosity, I guess, you know, to see, can you make something that has a quality or a sound world or something to it that attracts you and that sort of excites you. And I think it's kind of the same as, you know, as it was when I was 8 and knew 5 notes on the violin. I don't think it's that much of a different process, you know. It's just that, so that was the very beginning. And then I suppose after that in school, we had a few music teachers actually, but the teacher who happened to take me sort of through composition actually through most of my school was Bob Leonard. And he was like a brilliant natural musician. And he was actually, in a very kind of subtle way, he was, you know, very encouraging. You know, I just remember sort of some things I'd written. He kind of said, well, it's as fine a reel or an Irish air as I've ever played. And I thought, well, actually that's huge praise from him. So I kind of, you know, thought, well, I don't know, I kind of was excited by it. You know, I always just find it really exciting, and, you know, never really knew if there was anything you could do with it, you know. That I, as you know, then decided, for me, my loves in school were science and music, arts, drama. So the big dilemma for me, I suppose, in school was whether I would continue with a sensible career and, you know, do something with science, which was kind of definitely a safer option, or throw caution to the wind and continue with music. And I always kind of knew I maybe didn't want to teach full time, but although teaching is really enjoyable, but in terms of doing school teaching or something. But so I sort of thought, if the thing I really get excited about is composition, then that's a crazy career choice, obviously, you know, so that won't work. So I don't know, you just keep going with it, and then it becomes hard to give up, you know. And I suppose it sort of then becomes the thing that you're continuing to do.
Yeah, but it's not just what you do, it is what you are. So in a sense, all of those difficult decisions, even with your very intelligent and rational head on, like so many people, you'll still, you know, go and do the thing which is apparently crazy, because it's what you're meant to do, and you're not going to know if you don't try. But it also sounds as though you had very key supportive people from the word go in your musical experiences, who allowed you to try things, and that, okay, fair enough, you know, we all have stories about, well, about how many times you're supposed to practice a piece and whether you actually did or you didn't, this kind of thing, and these regimes, I suppose, that we were supposed to follow, and whether you then have the confidence to actually try something, or know that your creativity isn't being stifled, that you have those older and more experienced people who can manage those aspects of your abilities, to make sure that you ultimately will be a composer who does know what they're doing, with more than 5 notes and more than the violin, you know. And I think that's an incredibly powerful story to have, to be able to put your finger on that very beginning as an 8-year-old, because of the people around you as well.
Oh, absolutely. And experiences just have such a sort of massive impression, you know, that like Bob Leonard, I actually discussed it with a producer in London who was in school with me, you know, gorgeous producer with BBC, and she kind of was saying that she remembers the same conversations, those kind of things, when he first played Stravinsky, Symphony of Psalms. And, you know, it actually is, you know, those kind of things really imprint, you know, where he kind of said, I remember, you know, to a class of very chatty girls, kind of said, could everybody just get up and leave class today and not chat? because what you've heard is so new and so unfamiliar to you that I don't want you making a decision today about something that you don't have the reference points to kind of, to really make sense of. And I remember we all actually amazingly did walk silently to chemistry and French and whatever came next. And I think that's actually really important, because we were tiny and we knew nothing, but we did, hearing Stravinsky Symphony of Sound's first movement when you're used to playing Vivaldi, Bach, Corelli, was like being hit by a bus. And sort of having somebody not just kind of going through the kind of structures of the work and stuff, but somebody also actually taking care of you and saying, don't prejudge something, or don't make a snap judgment on something when you don't have the reference points. And I think it kind of applies to so many things in life, and was like, it's such a wise thing, and by the end of the year, it kind of was like my addiction work, I was so excited by it, but as you say, it's those kind of having responsible leadership and guidance, early on is really exciting,
Yeah. But also that, I think another thread that's coming through there is that even if you needed to be guided in those, tender teenage years of, yes, it is a good idea maybe to think about this a little bit more and just let it settle in, but that it's also catering for the individual, that for all of you in that class, you all would have had a different reaction and assimilation. So it's again, empowering you to, give it the time and the space, and then see what you actually do, not even think, but sort of how you react to it and how you assimilate it. That, which is really incredible, and of course a huge part of the conversation in music education, certainly in the UK, is going back to music in schools, and the climate that we are in, and the effects, that you can see when children do not have access to music. There are lots of amazing teachers and a lot of amazing music services in schools, but just in the fabric of what every child is supposed to experience, sadly it's often not there. So moving on from that, that's a really fascinating beginning, and now we're jumping on just a few years to your, I'm very curious about your working environment. So a snapshot of where you're technically based, but I'm very curious about things, certainly thinking about the festival in Valentia, which is this incredible location, and that is such an important resonating theme, I think, through people coming together, whether it's for one day or whether it's for 4, to share all of these events. So there's, the very obvious or basic urban-rural kind of not divide, but sensations, and how that actually impacts on your working environment as a composer. Are there particular things that get you going, that inspire you, or are you constantly surprised by the thing that actually does become that sort of, beginning point where you abandon 10 pages and you know that this page 1 is different because of what just happened yesterday? And I know you're also very, just from talking to you before and knowing your music, I know art can also be a very important instigator and inspiration to you. So it would be really interesting to hear from you a little bit, particularly thinking about natural environment in Ireland.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's all, absolutely true, Mary. The sort of, I mean, my dad had a dairy farm, but the area that my dad's farm was sort of the beginning of sort of what they would call the gateway to Southdown. So the topography in Ireland just kind of changes every 4 meters, it's sort of like, flat hills, it just changes quite rapidly. And the area that my dad's from, the area of his farm, was an area that was shaped by the sort of retraction of the ice during the Ice Age, and sort of particular formation of drumlins, which are very steep. They're little like egg-shaped hills, and there's millions of them. So it just means that, you know, my dad's farm is kind of the top of one of the really steep drumlins. And what it means, you just see for like 50 miles nearly on a good day, or at least like 30 miles, you know, you can see further on a good day, but it just gives you this kind of sense of space, you know, there's like huge amount of space. And you know, where my mom is from in County Roscommon is quite flat. So if we went to Roscommon, we'd be kind as kids quite shocked at the lack of hills, you know, where it sort of becomes like a physical jolts on the eye actually nearly. But so I think that kind of also, I think, Mary, as well, the kind of, I mean, that could have been something that was kind of like a side experience as such, but was really quite impactful. I think partly because of, you know, I think if you work on a farm, which, you know, most farmers' kids work on a farm, feed calves, bring in cows, you know, do things that are kind of helpful. And I think working also in Ireland in the weather, which can be quite extreme and should we say dramatic at times. So, you know, if you've worked, you know, on a hill that has huge kind of sense of space and you're being pelted on with freezing, driving rain,
and you don't have your
snow,
oilskins on, so you're like totally lost. Yeah.
You know, or like, you know, I was helping my brother some winters ago and it was like -5 and he had started doing some sheep, and you know, I just like 4 hours of -5 dosing sheep, and you just think, you know, the weather kind of becomes part of you physically. It sort of becomes, I often wonder why I keep writing ice pieces, sort of, you know, and I kind of think, why does my mind keep going to these kind of ice landscapes? And as part of me sort of wonders, is it, you know, kind of having to persevere in like literally bone chilling cold, and but it's not all bad. I think it's kind of, it's in lots of ways there's something really beautiful about it. And I think when you go through the actual immediate physical discomfort and not feeling your legs or face or hands, or, you know, but you actually can then enter sort of like a deeper kind of sense of being connected, you know, to the ground and to the land and the landscape and to the weather, you know. And I often sometimes think that weather is a part of the space that you go into, because like the difficulty is in lots of ways with music, or, you know, with even talking about music, is that ultimately it's abstract. So you're not dealing with sort of you're not teasing out ideas that are to do with language or an image or a lack of image, you know. So you end up kind of going into these spaces that are abstract spaces, and then the way that you kind of find, I don't know if it would always be like this, but I think visual art and the landscape, the natural world, often sort of have found a presence in pieces that I'm writing. I think because you're going into an abstract space that has no visual dimensions and has no context or semantics, there's nothing. And that informing a kind of just the abstract kind of sounds, that it's sometimes happens that you anchor like a visual dimension, which sometimes I wonder, is it even just a way to pick up on what you did the day before? You know, because you go to bed and you get up the next day and work on the piece, and, you know, you want to have some way to kind of not lose what you did last week or yesterday, and have some way to sort of hold, you know, some sense of the piece as one whole, despite all the interruptions to eat and, you know, sleep and things. So sometimes I wonder, is it just like an anchor, or, you know, maybe it's just that I think quite visually anyway. But I think that's, and it's just sort of stuff that rises forth, and it's also very physical, because music, I think, is quite a physical thing. You know, so that I don't use software until the absolute last moment, when I kind of then have to. But so I tend to, you know, work with pencils and papers and violin and piano and walks, and sort of, so it's sort of, in that way, it sort of stays as a quite a physical thing. And sort of that kind of, I suppose, your experience of the natural world, and then also visual art, which I've always really loved visual art. But also I think that some of the big questions for me in music have had some solutions through some visual art pieces and visual art visual art experiences, really. Particularly abstract expressionists, who I've been really passionate about for quite a long time. And I think, often being caught off guard as well, Mary, you know, where you've gone to a gallery, you know, and you've had, I mean, actually a really old experience I had was in, the old Tate Britain, before they had even the Rothko rooms in the Tate Modern, and kind of spending a full day just going around the galleries and being really excited by a lot of the art that was immediately attracted your attention. And then kind of coming back to like the Rothko at the end of the day and just crying, you know, and just kind of thinking, oh my God, actually my experience of it at the end of the day is different to at the beginning of the day. And starting to then deconstruct, you know, what is it about this piece that is really affecting, and how is it holding your attention with so little on the canvas, and what is it? And actually really asking those kind of difficult questions that then made me kind of, or help find ways to, you know, find answers to some of the you know, the parts of you that are becoming uncomfortable with certain things in music and are being attracted towards other types of music. And then you have to question, I suppose, in a way, what's attracting me here and what's making me unhappy with, you know, this.
But so that's like going back to your Bobby Leonard days of, you know, just take your time, don't do it now.
Don't judge.
But then another, just to go back to the weather for a minute, which, I mean, you know, you could live in another country and it's far more extreme.
That's true.
But no, and that's what, you know, one might be used to, but there are extremes within what you've just spoken about. And it's almost like there's a kind of I don't really think the word submission is what I'm looking for, but there's definitely an acceptance, and that okay, this is what it is. So I mean, I can completely you know, we could go tit for tat on lots of these experiences, not with sheep, but certainly with cattle. And so submission, I don't think is the right well, yes, you have to submit to a certain extent, or else you would never get it done, and you would just leave the situation, and you know that it is going to take about 4 hours. So you just allow yourself, the barriers do come down, and you accept the fact that you're going to be there for this length of time, and then those aspects which are, you know, in the first instance uncomfortable, they disappear, and you are in this other sort of undefined space, and you are not necessarily talking to people. You're there with I don't know, animals or people, but you're also really with yourself, I think. And I think weather is a hugely identifying, you know, feature of living in whatever locality in Ireland one might be in, you know. And also I remember having a conversation with a music educator a number of years ago, and we were talking about work ethic. And you know, there is a certain amount to be said for that as well, I think, you know, that okay, you know, the animals aren't going to feed themselves. It kind of boils down to that, or going to be able to bed themselves, so somebody has to do it. And you know, I know we always made a special effort on Christmas Eve that they were particularly comfortable more than other days, which is kind of, you know, sweet when you're a child. But I'm really interested though in hearing a little bit more, if you can, about it might be a very difficult question, but yes, that physical experience in space and in climate, and you know, talking about the topography and the identity as well, which is can be so localized, and then artwork and how you're absorbed by that, and then how that actually does feed into sound, this abstract that you're working in, this medium. Is the actual physical act of writing by hand a really important part of that as well, the physicality of it?
I mean, I think
process.
I kind of, once the piece goes into software, I kind of feel like I've lost it. I sort of feel like it's gone. Somebody else has it now. It's, you know, just even the look of it changes. Everything about it changes. I mean, I think for me, probably one of my, I always think, you know, you have tasks and things that you struggle with. And one of my struggles is probably to have a better relationship with my software so that I don't dread that moment when I put it into software, because I sort of feel like I lose, there's an intimacy with the material that I kind of feel that I lose once it's gone into the software. I feel like some part of it is gone from me, you know, that's why I try to do the creative part before then. But then I think, you know, if you rethink it, you know, you could just have a different relationship with it. But I think the art, do you know, it's the big things, the way the visual art that I love and that I'm kind of, you know, transfixed by, in some ways is not that different. I think to say something like the sea, Dieppe, which I know you've been using, sort of kind of a sea piece, setting Beckett, but you know, it's sort of that thing that it kind of fascinates me that in music, I think there's this whole history of stuff that gets passed on subconsciously, accidentally, without awareness, but there's a whole tranche of stuff that gets passed down through that. Some of it's not helpful, you know, that there's an anxiety thing, sort of, as Kevin Volans would talk about, this anxiety for change, that kind of, there's a whole history to why we have that. But, you know, whoever sat at the sea for 2 hours and thought, do you know, see, I would love this if you maybe just changed the color now and then, or, you know, did something different with your waveforms, you know, otherwise I would love it. You know, you never think that, you know, you kind of become hypnotized. And the same as the skies, like I think the sky can be such an incredible, you know, you snapshot of the sky and you just think, oh my word, you know, such an experience, just that moment, and it changes in 5 minutes, you know, but it's still gray or, you know, kind of blue or whatever. But you never say, I would love this experience if you maybe threw some, you know, bold greens and, you know, taupes in it, then it would be interesting. And yet sort of in music, and it's something I really struggle with, the fact that I think in music there's somehow this inherited sense of not being okay with things not changing, you know, with things being really pure and really unified and not allowing change. And that's a big thing sort of in my kind of thinking, that I think if I love it in the visual art experience and I love it in nature, why won't I let it just be like that in a piece? You know, why do I get anxious that, well, you know, the material has been like this for 2 minutes, surely it must change, you know? And yeah, that's a really, you know, and I think in the pieces where I really felt I went all out, you know, and I let a material last for a full 3 minutes before there was any change, you know, I felt like I was taking a massive risk, you know, and that, you know, if you were to go to a kind of gallery experience of, you know, where almost wall to wall everything is very, very unified or not really changing that much, or, you know, you think of one of the abstract expressionists who spent decades kind of doing the same thing, you sort of think, like, why in music do we have different parameters? You know, I think there's historical reasons for that, but I also kind of feel it's a battle that when I get really super courageous, that I'll just bust through that kind of, you know, imposition of change. It's almost like, you know, I think part of it comes from, as you say, Mary, education as well. It's sort of, certainly when you're, you know, when I was kind of teaching some, you know, bits of different teaching, you kind of have that thing where you've got, you know, where's your next section, and where, you know, where's the, you do to me, like when something is literally, if you were to present a wild piece that has one idea, that is through composed, that literally doesn't go through bells, whistles, you know, that isn't trying to be clever or isn't trying to protect itself with the edifice of a really smart architecture that you've pre-planned, you start to feel quite vulnerable and raw. But actually that's where things kind of get interesting for me, because, you know, I suppose this is where I think things get interesting, that sort of the battles of, you know, something that's, you know, a piece that is made, is given this kind of protection through its defense, and the defense is the program note, or the defense is the talk that you give before the performance, or the defense is that it has a really clever superstructure. And I suppose for me, the real crises composers were probably people like Morton Feldman, where that just does not, that's not the edifice. And so Time Shining, which you wrote, actually was a piece, the first piece I wrote after I had like a really big crisis with all that stuff and started to feel utterly miserable, hating everything I was writing and still wanting to write, but not liking what I was writing, and feeling sort of that, there's a sort of way I needed to write because that's what was expected of me, but I didn't want to be writing like that. And, kind of all that stuff that comes through. And I think, it's very difficult, but I also knew that I had to allow myself go through those difficult dilemmas, and also really come to terms with, everything being broken down. You think of like Lamont Young, Feldman, Cage, Tenney, all those people doing something that's so utterly kind of in another world away from predetermined structures and stuff that's kind of, so I think it's, for me, I kind of had to let myself be I suppose very, very broken by all the different things that I wasn't happy with. And then you have to let yourself just grow to ground and start from nothing. And Time Shining, actually, which you've been playing, has that was a big moment piece for me in terms of Ian Wilson, composer and pianist, was playing a concert in Belgrade and asked me to write a piece, and I said, "Oh, actually, Ian, no, I'm giving up. I'm not writing anymore." And he said, "No, you can't. And I said, "Yeah, I can." And because I was really, it was after my master's. I was just at a really low point, and we did a deal that I would write that piece and then I could give up. And he said, "Well, you have to write this piece and then you're allowed to give up." And it sort of freed me, actually, because I kind of thought, I'm just letting everything go. And I kind of wanted to, I said it probably will be influenced by Feldman, even though it's not like Feldman at all. But the sort of struggles I was having of, Feldman's relationship with time and duration, and being lost in a piece and being lost in the moment, being lost in the scale of a piece, not the structure of a piece. Kind of, that was big kind of stuff to be grappling with. And I kind of wanted to sort of come to the moment of the piece. And also, something I had, I remember doing a kind of gallery thing where there was somebody was doing a little chat about some of the artworks. And I remember the guy using like a square. It was like a little frame, like a little empty picture frame. And he sort of brought it to a big work, and he just said, if you ever look at a piece of art that is really brilliant, that's kind of every little part of this piece, no matter where you put it, that actual square will look amazing. That it doesn't have to be just the piece as a whole entity. And that really kind of made me think that, if could we say that about sort of every piece of music, that, just like 5 seconds of it are really fascinating, that, if you took it out of its 10-minute context, that you've had a 5-second snapshot of it, and is that beautiful? And if you moved it over here, is that actually really beautiful, or something, you want to hear? And
it sounds like a word that you haven't used, but for very good reasons in your explanations and sharing all of this, is form. And what is form, and what should form be for you, and finding ways to tackle that and to work through it. If it is an expectation and something that you're supposed to be, as you say, defend or be able to intelligently talk about, and actually that's a wonderful image of the image of those small squares of any one. I mean, it could be a circle, I suppose, but if it is just
Yeah,
this
that
snapshot,
moment.
yeah,
And actually that
absolutely.
thing as well, Mary, where you were kind of, sometimes I think, where you want the moment, just what that moment is. And that's also why I think, ultimately it's this drive where I think, if you can suspend the moment so that you have a kind of, that you immerse in the moment and that you really experience the moment and that you're not just traveling through it. Because the difficulty with music is that it only really happens through time, and it's through the unfolding of time that you experience whatever the whole entity is. But you also want that kind of moment experience, that actual in the moment experience, to be something that is like feeding you, like giving you something back. And yeah, I suppose there's this tendency, not that I ever really did this a whole lot, but that there was a sort of tendency to maybe organize your materials or sort of get a really, like, just maybe, I suppose a lot of music sort of just historically has kind of gone a certain direction of pitch organization or, stuff. And I think I wanted it to be like a real holistic experience, like the actual moment, somehow a bit like, when you experience a piece of art in a gallery, or a moment in nature, be it at the sea or whatever, where it really kind of just knocks you down, kind of that you sort of think, I want that in music as well, where there's that just actual moment that it's kind of like really impacting, and so I suppose and sometimes the answers for these things come from, thinking, just, how is the experience, with freezing ice. And
so that is part of because there is a little program note for Time Shining, and you do refer to frozen landscapes, don't you? So
yeah.
I was wondering if we could just chat for maybe 5 minutes about the 3 pieces of yours that we're absolutely delighted to have been able to perform and program in different places during the world. So Time Shining is part of the opening concert. We've also extracted about 4 minutes of it to accompany one part of our digital installation. And then there's a violin and piano piece called Secundum, which is also in that concert, and then your choral piece, Dieppe. So yeah, Time Shining with the frozen landscape. Is that, am I right?
Yes, correct, yeah. But I mean, that one piece was, as I said, that was like when I kind of went clean slate, don't know what's going to happen here, but and I kind of wanted to I wanted to shed some baggage, I think, really, and to feel free, like it was to just feel very, very free writing that. So in that way it was I was kind of quite influenced, I suppose, by what had become a stronger kind of pulse, the Feldman kind of influence in a way, just kind of really seeing what happened kind of almost moment to moment, not that it's like Feldman, but that kind of context. And as I was writing the piece, there was a memory I had of being I was living away and I had come back to my dad's farm and had been out in it was really heavy snowfall, and just that thing, when there's such heavy snow, it sort of sucks sound out of the air. It sort of suddenly it's almost like you can't hear it. It's like you're in a vacuum, and everything looked completely unified. Like everything was white, and there was just dark sky and white. And just for a moment, it was so odd. Kind of felt like time just had stopped. And I think because I couldn't hear anything, the sound had gone completely, and everything was completely still. And just as I was writing that piece, that memory sort of resurfaced, and that's usually how the kind of those things attach themselves to pieces. So in a way, it's not. I end up using it kind of connected to the title because it sort of became like a constant presence in the piece as I was writing it, and just that memory sort of just stayed with the piece. So, and I think I'd written like a few lines of a little poem or something, and that's actually was the last line of it. But yeah, so that, yeah, the sense of space, I think, and also the stillness and unity. And I think, again, you know, that's that kind of, you know, even though, you know, the piece felt to me like I was really extending the same kind of thing for as long as I could, which, you know, compared to, you know, a huge big 2-hour drone piece, not so much, but it felt like a big effort, you know, of stretch for me to sort of try and sustain and not keep introducing change, and then also to let change happen when it did, you know, sort of almost that you sort of maybe just slightly more naturalist in the way that a piece would evolve, so that in the moment, if it felt right, that it would slip into something else and slip back into something. So that I think I was trying to embrace slightly more naturalistic kind of modes of allowing something evolve, you know, instead of everything being slightly harnessed and well controlled and you know, very well behaved. So
but I think as well, and hopefully this will come across in the recorded concert, what really also stands out is that our ears are focused in on something, be it one note which is repeated in a not predictable repeating pattern, but the tiny changes become really quite monumental. And then another relative, what you might think is a larger change, can be absolutely enormous. So it's like the amplitude, if you're looking at it through that sort of thing, of the piece is really amazing. As a listener, there's something very very particular in that feeling of the resonance, because the tiny changes are so beautifully crafted. And I think in secundum as well, as a player, that will be a reaction. I know it's a different type of material that you started with anyway, and Dara talks about it a bit in the introduction to the piece and the concert. But I mean, for me, when I'm listening to that piece, the use of harmonics, I think, as that sound world on the violin is really special. I was wondering if there's anything you'd like to say about secundum.
Yeah, secundum, I mean, it was to be connected to a little piece of Hearty, and I just took the first 2 chords because I thought they were gorgeous, actually, and kind of, you know, put them in a lower octave, so they had a kind of more kind of chocolatey kind of resonance. And I kind of, you know, that piece, the harmonics, like from I ever learned harmonics, like as a player, I'm mad about them. I think they're like little diamonds, you know. I just love them. I love the feel of them, play them, and I love the fact that they're natural as well. Like natural harmonics in particular really fascinate me, you know, because I think they kind of belong to nature, you know, in the way that diamonds do, or, you know, anything that's sort of natural. So I sort of feel like you're tapping into something that's that's part of a bigger creative force, you know. In some ways I kind of think that, you know, probably even the creative drive is sort of tapping into just like a sort of creative force that drives the universe, you know, that it's sort of something just very deep, you know. So there's something really, really, I'm mad about particularly natural harmonics, although they don't come without their headaches when you use like 45 million of them, and you end up with a score that's like 3 times the size it should be, because you've had to like duplicate everything. But yes, they don't come without their problems. But I am kind of really beguiled by them. I never really tire of them, but they have a kind of quality that's just quite ephemeral and diaphanous, and sort of just the way they feel even, you know. But the relationship between the violin and the piano in that piece was a little bit of a sort of focus for me, I suppose, in how I put the piece together, because I wanted to have complete freedom to do whatever I wanted, except that the hearty 2 chords would be the underpinning. And in that sense, I wanted the violin to be a little bit like a spirited alter ego, or you know, a bit like a
kind of commentator.
yeah, or a bit like a teenager who's got more of a wild energy, kind of trying to break through, and the piano's a little bit more sensible and grounded. And I sort of thought maybe that's an interesting thing to play with that relationship, that they're not, you know, both like, you know, two people on a motorbike going the same direction the whole time, but that they kind of have, you know, different kind of, that their relationship to one another is slightly different. And yeah, I sort of used to think of the piano kind of drawing the violin back in again, like pulling a little balloon back in or something. But it's a delicate piece, but yeah, just I mean, it's completely abstract, you know, you're just really dealing, but I mean, every piece you write in a way is abstract, you know, that is, you're dealing with the materials you're writing, and the resonance and the color of that. And but yeah, do you know, it was, yeah, a lovely little kind of, and actually I really like short form as well. Like short form can be quite kind of quite a lovely little form to work with as well.
No, it's an absolute gem of a
I know Dara keeps saying, apparently I did promise to lengthen it, which I must do at some point, and have two versions. He found an email which he presented me with.
And then just to wrap up, Deirdre, it would be wonderful to hear a bit then about your writing for voices. So the first event as part of this festival, in a sense, is the first showing of this digital installation, and there's some video footage of Valentia by Stephen Power, and he has used Dieppe as the soundscape to this installation. So it would be wonderful, just before we say bye, to hear a little bit about writing for voices then, because the other two pieces are instrumental that we're featuring here, and also you've mentioned the sea already and how that actually plays through in Dieppe, which we're fortunate to be able to have the Irish Chamber Choir recording of to use on this installation.
Yeah, it was written for Chamber Choir Ireland, who had commissioned. It was I set Beckett. They had asked me to have a French. They were touring with a French theme, with Celso Antunes as was conducting them at that point. And so that was my only brief from them, was sort of the length, and something kind of French would be good if you can make that work. And actually my kind of first feelings were, if I could get something to do with the sea, I would, you know, I knew he was kind of moving that direction. Again, it was just coming from the material, so I sort of had an idea of the kind of material I wanted to kind of work with, and I thought sea would kind of work with it quite well. So I knew Beckett's plays, much more experienced Beckett's plays than his poetry, but kind of was looking through his poetry at that point and found Dieppe and was like, oh my god, this is like perfect. So yeah, so it's really short, 17 words in French and English. And I mean, getting permission from John Calder was like a huge project, but he was brilliant actually. But he was going through and he was moving the business at that point, and he kept giving me permission on the phone, but we needed it in person, and sort of in written form. So he was brilliant about it, and that was really brilliant to get the permission for that. And that again was another kind of piece that felt like a big risk, Mary, if I'm honest. You know, it sort of felt like I knew that I wanted this material to really sustain. I started with sort of ridiculous researching of ocean wave kind of mathematics, thinking, you know, maybe because I work, you know, Time Shining uses some Fibonacci stuff, and I thought, you know, maybe I could get like, you know, ocean waveforms, maybe do something that is, you know, a nod to, but it's so complex for starts. And then I thought, like, stop complicating things. You know, I just kind of, you know, the Dieppe is again the last ebb, the dead shingle, the turning, and that thing of the sort of the tide coming in, just the very, very edge of the tide, and sort of just as it's turning and about to pull out again. So really, you're, you know, sort of, I suppose it's almost, I often thought of the Beckett as being like a slow motion of the tide coming in, just those last laps before the sea's really actually starting to pull back out again. And I thought if I could do that with the choir, where it sort of felt like they were in slow motion, you know, where their waveform was in slow motion, So it kind of, again, you know, and it felt like I was taking this big risk where the material doesn't change, you know, for, you know, quite a few minutes. Um, uh, but yeah, I don't know why that's such a struggle, because it's, you know, it's what I wanted to do, but it felt like I was having to battle justifying what I was doing to myself. But yeah, that was another work that kind of, yeah, sometimes I think when you make the risk with yourself, it's actually, you have to, even if it flops. That's kind of my theory. You know, make the risk. If it's a total disaster, you will have learned, but you have to make the risk, you know. So but yeah, it's actually a piece I'm really kind of fond of, I suppose, because it felt like a big risk. And then yeah, once, I think you have that nervousness until it actually happens. I remember the chamber choir were based in DCU at that point, and I remember kind of nervously kind of coming up one of the corridors thinking, you know, you're just butterflies, because you don't know, I mean, you know, you've lived with it and breathed it for a long time, but you still don't really know, is it going to work, you know. And kind of, I love that moment when you hear the piece being performed, but you're not with them yet. So you don't have to feel anxious, you know, you don't have to feel self-conscious. There's no audience, there's nobody. You're just actually hearing the piece in pure form.
Yeah.
I remember just thinking, oh, it's okay, you know, it's it's okay. So yeah, so, but again, I mean, it's like Kerry's, you know, a place I've spent quite a bit of time, you know, at different points. I'm mad about Kerry, and sort of like traipsing sort of Ventry Beach and, you know, Dingle, all those kind of, that kind of sea experience. You know, I'm delighted that you're using Dieppe actually for the Valentia Island Festival, because, you know, that sea experience is sort of, you know, anyone who's, you know, lives near the coast, you kind of sort of, yeah, you know, it sort of becomes a part of you, that kind of sea. And yeah, just some, in some way kind of replicating or having some kind of, I suppose, deference or nod to those very kind of elemental structures is, it feels, yeah, it just feels like, yeah, it feels like home ground for me. But yeah, it's but beautiful as well. It's sort of like, in some ways, deconstructing things that you find intoxicating or beautiful, and trying to find ways, inroads into, I suppose, what you're writing, some way having that make inroads that are real or feel real, you know.
Well, we are obviously devastated that we're not all there in person this year, but really, thank you so much for sharing so much and giving us so much insight into your identity as a composer, and where it all started and where it's still going. And you know, it's a great privilege as well to have this time to talk with you, and for you to tell us about the three pieces that our audiences can hear. So Dieppe, which we've spoken about there last, is, as I say, part of the first event on well, by the time this interview is released, the installation will already have been happening, and with a little bit of Time Shining, and then in the concert on Friday night, you can hear Time Shining and Secundum. So thank you, Deirdre. We'll see you on Valentia some other time, hopefully. And thank you for all your time and wisdom and music.
Well, thank you so much for including me. It's a real privilege. Thank you so much.